All right, continuing on with our maintenance and understanding how we maintain our daily operations when we're working with Terraform. One of the things that you're going to come into is the fact that you may need to upgrade your modules or upgrade the provider that you're using in order to take advantage of new functionality. So as an example on the screen here, I've got some Terraform that's deploying some very basic resources. I've got an AWS VPC, some private subnets, and really that's about it. I've got a CloudWatch resource policy and then a data lookup down here. So pretty simple, and everything works out well. So if I do a Terraform state list, you can see that this is deployed and everything looks great. If I do a Terraform providers down here, you can see that currently I am using provider 5.80.0, which is a fairly recent version of the provider. However, as I'm working with my Terraform, maybe I want to add some new resources. Maybe I want to take advantage of some new services that exist in AWS or my cloud provider or whatever the target platform is. However, Terraform doesn't always support the latest versions of resources. So for example, maybe I come down to the bottom here and I want to add a new data block to look up some information about a Route 53 zone that I have, right? Maybe I want to start creating DNS records on that. So for example, if I create a new data block and I call this AWS Route 53 underscore records, right? So this is going to be a new data block, and I'll just call this Krausen because I'm going to look up my Krausen.io records here. And what I want to do is say the zone ID equals, and then I'm going to look up the zone ID for this zone right above it. So I'm going to do data.aws route 53.selected. All right. And then I'm going to also add .zone ID here. Okay, so we're going to grab data from this data block here, and we're going to look up the zone ID for that. So what I can do here is then ultimately I can start creating additional resource blocks below it to create different records, all right? So for our zone ID, because maybe that's data that we need to create records. Maybe I also want to add an output to that as well. So I can output our zone ID. So call this zone ID, and then we'll do value equals data dot, and we'll go ahead and find our records here, right here, and we'll just output that data. Okay, great. Now what we can do is, since we've added that, I can go down here and I'm gonna clear out the screen here. I'm gonna do a Terraform format, just to format everything, make sure it looks good. Terraform plan, and let's see what happens here. Oh, it says invalid data source. It says the provider HashiCorp AWS does not support the data source called AWS Route 53 records. Well, I know that's a valid data source. So let's go over to the documentation. Now this is actually the changelog for the AWS provider, and every single provider is going to have a changelog that you can look at. So you can see what's been added, what's been removed, what's been deprecated, etc. So what we'll do is we'll grab this data block right here that I'm trying to use. I'll go back over here and I'm simply going to search for it. So it says, hey, this is a new data resource. So if we go up, that was actually added in the provider 5.83.0. However, we go back over here and clear the screen again, Terraform provider. You can see that we are currently, on 5.80.0. So as of right now, the Terraform provider for AWS, it doesn't know about this data source. If you go to my providers, you can see I've got it locked down to 5.80.0 or patch versions, all right? And it doesn't know about this data source. So how do we get access to it? Well, what we can do is actually upgrade our provider. And so what we can do is, assuming that we've tested all of our other blocks in here, I can go into our required providers and maybe I can just change this to 83.0. Now what I can do is I can run a Terraform plan and it's going to error out, all right? And so it says the version has to be greater or equal to the 5.83. However, if you look under Terraform here, and I move this over, you can see I only have 5.80 downloaded. So we're not matching our version constraint here. And so the error here actually tells us how to fix this. It says 5.80 doesn't match the updated version constraint of 5.83. So what we need to do is run a Terraform upgrade. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to run a Terraform init-upgrade. And what this is going to do is going to go download the version for us, 583.0. It's going to download 583.1, which is the latest version of the 583 here. And then we've downloaded it. So I'm going to clear that again. Terraform plan, like we did before. Now we're using the latest version. And you can see we don't get an error. You can see we actually are going to output the zone ID. So if I do a Terraform plan, oops, I just did a plan. Terraform apply and hit enter there. We'll say yes. And there we go. So you can see it was successful now, and we were able to output our zone ID here. Because again, this particular data block was not available until 583.0, and we were currently using 5.80.0. So again, this is something you're going to run into as you're using Terraform, and it's important to understand how to be able to upgrade your providers in order to take advantage of new resources. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that as you upgrade your providers, well, you probably want to test this somewhere else, because what's going to happen is you're also going to find deprecation errors when you upgrade, and maybe you didn't take that into consideration. So if you go over to the documentation over here, the changelog, if you just search for deprecated in here, you can see that in certain resources, they've deprecated certain arguments. So before, in AWS IAM role, there used to be an argument called managed policy ARNs. But what they did was they separated it out into a different resource. So now instead of using this argument inside of the AWS IAM role, well, you'd want to use this specific resource instead in order to make that configuration. So if you happen to be using AWS IAM role with this argument and you updated past 572, well, you're going to get an error saying, hey, you know what? This managed policy ARNs is no longer supported. You need to use this specific resource instead moving forward. So it's important to make sure that you test your existing code when you plan to upgrade your providers, or even when you plan to upgrade your modules. Remember that modules are also developed separately. So modules can also take advantage of these deprecations or these new resources and things like that. So if you want to be sure to take advantage of those new features of new modules, well, you need to actually perform the same thing. You need to specify the new version of the module that you want to move to, and then you need to run your Terraform init upgrade to allow Terraform to download the newest version of that module, so then you can take advantage of it. All right, so hopefully that was helpful for you. You can go through, again, run a Terraform init upgrade, and that's going to upgrade all of your providers and all of your modules depending on what you specified inside of your providers block, and of course in your modules as well. When you're declaring your module inside of your main.tf and you're specifying that version, if you increment that version, you need to run your Terraform init upgrade in order to make sure you download the latest version, and you can take advantage of all those new features and functionality that comes with newer providers and newer modules. So that's it for this video. Let's go into the hands-on lab, and you can get practice doing this in the hands-on lab yourself.